Would you like to know how the microbiome can actually cause anxiety and depression? Well, then watch this video to find out. Hello, my name is Jesse, and welcome to the channel Open Source Owners, where we talk about what if humans had an owner's manual. Well, if we're mapping anxiety and depression, we're really trying to understand the origins. If we're thinking of anxiety and depression not as the problem or the cause, but rather a symptom of some other cause, well, then we can do no better, at least to begin with, than using this simple model. The biological, the psychological, the social, and the spiritual, those four aspects of anybody's life can actually drive or cause anxiety and depression. Today, we're going to be talking about the microbiome, which is squarely in the biological domain, though it influences the others, and the others are influencing to the microbiome. So what is the microbiome? Well, let's first start by understanding the gut. So the gut is the mouth, the nose, the throat, the stomach, the small and large intestines, and the anus. It's a tube that runs through your body. And if you think about your outside skin as actually just infolding and continuing all the way through your body, and then exfolding, unfolding, and then going on the outside of your body, then you get to begin to understand how important the skin is, your actual physical skin on the outside of your body, as a reflection of your gut health. What's going on inside of your internal skin, the tube inside of you, actually reflects on the outside of you. So like acne and pimples and zits and different skin, psoriasis, things like that are actually reflections of what's going on inside of your gut. And the gut is not to be dismissed or misunderstood. In fact, the gut is called the second brain for a very good reason. For one, there's 100 trillion microbes inside of you. And that's just in the gut. Now you have microbes on your skin and in the breast and in the testes as well, even in the brain and in the womb. Yes, it is true. Though the predominance of the microbes that live inside of you, which we call the microbiome, are in your gut, and particularly the small and large intestines, even more particularly the small intestine. What are those 100 trillion microbes? Well, bacteria, fungi, protozoa, parasites, viruses. You have the whole creepy crawly world inside of you at levels approximating stars in the galaxy. 100 trillion is incomprehensible. It's beyond our ability to understand. But what we do understand is that these little microorganisms drive neurotransmitter production and ultimately can drive mood and emotion. Now, your gut donates 2 million genes to your genome. Now, you as a human only have about 20,000 genes. So when you're talking about 2 million genes versus 20,000 genes, that's several orders of magnitude more genetic material and interactions that you actually get and interact with and influence your behavior, your thoughts, and ultimately your mood for things like anxiety and depression are much more driven and much more controlled by those gut microbiome than it is by your own human genes. So if you blame genes, if you say, well, it's just genetic, I can't help it, of course I have depression, or of course I have anxiety, well, that's not entirely true. Those 2 million genes of the microbiome can do parallel swapping back and forth very, very quickly. They can change very, very quickly. They can alter the expression of your 20,000 genes, and that's called epigenetics. Who's doing most of the epigenetic manipulation in your body? Microbiome. The non-human part of you is actually turning on and off and expressing your genes. It's a very fascinating world. And if you didn't know that, if you weren't looking at anxiety and depression as symptoms, you wouldn't know to look deeper into the gut to understand from whence they came. It is these microbes that assemble, disassemble, and create most of your neurotransmitters. So things like serotonin, dopamine, GABA, glutathione. 95% of your serotonin is produced in your gut. About 400% more serotonin is produced in the gut than anywhere else in the body. 50% of your dopamine is produced in the gut. A large percentage of your GABA and your glutathione is produced in the gut. And your emotions are basically interactions of those chemicals, interactions of those neurotransmitters. So in a way, these little creepy crawly microbes create human emotion. Now, it's probably more complicated than that, but there's a strong connection between the two. Hey, did you know that anxiety is the #1 mental health condition in the United States of America? Around 20% of people in America will experience or have experienced anxiety. And it's not exactly a pleasant thing to experience. If you're watching this, you probably know yourself or you know somebody who's suffered with anxiety. It can be life debilitating. It certainly is life hindering. And it does not allow for the fullest expression of your creative potential genius as a human being on Earth. We are all capable of deep creative genius, I think. And anxiety is just one of those things that can really get in the way and limit that creative potential. Depression is the #1 cause of injury and disability worldwide. So now we're talking about millions and millions and millions of people. 350 million people worldwide affected with depression. How many more million affected with anxiety? And often, if you're one of the lucky ones, I say in jest, you'll experience both of them together, which is most common with my clientele, is they not only have depression, but they have anxiety too. And it's sort of like a mixed scenario where they're kind of both brewing. Maybe one takes dominance for some period and then the other, but kind of they're always there, both together equally. Nearly 1 in 3 adolescents, so 12 to 18-year-olds, will experience an anxiety disorder. This is an epidemic. Are we going to allow our society to create the conditions where the symptom of anxiety is unnatural, just like we don't even question it anymore? 1 in 3 children are going to have anxiety and 1 in 5 are going to have depression or something like that. Is that acceptable by any stretch of the imagination? No is the answer. It is not. So we must understand how to map anxiety and depression and then resolve anxiety and depression at a root cause. So we want to end anxiety and depression forever. That's the goal. And you might think that that's like impossible or high in the sky, but it's actually not. The ending of anxiety and depression forever equals what I call sustainable mental health, or you might just call it sustainable health, because mental health is sort of a false division of total health. Because really what we want is sustainable health, physical, mental, emotional. We want the whole thing, spiritual health, right? Now, I'm talking about mental health specifically because anxiety and depression relate to mental health, but really what we really want, and the way to actually end anxiety and depression forever, is to have sustainable physical, emotional, total health, right? Complete health. And if we're looking at the biological domain specifically, let's look at this book. This is Your Brain on Food by Dr. Uma Naidoo. Now, this book is really good in that it gives you a really broad overview of a lot of mental health conditions and how food and what we eat and how nutrients and polyphenols and how the gut microbiome actually affects and drives a lot of things, from bipolar to anxiety to depression to PTSD to OCD. All sorts of things in this book, totally worth your read. And in particular, I'm going to point out chapter 2 and chapter 3, where the author talks about depression, and then in chapter 3, anxiety. So specific data, specific information that is about the types of things that cause depression from a food perspective, and the types of things that cause anxiety from the food perspective, but also the types of things that have been shown to reduce or eliminate depression and anxiety. Now, Dr. Naidoo is a psychiatrist from Harvard, but check this out. She's actually technically what's called a nutritional psychiatrist, which is kind of a new domain of psychiatry where she can do all the other prescribing. She can give you an antidepressant or whatnot, but she can also, and has training deeply in the nutritional sciences. So she can provide you with amino acid therapy or some type of nutritional therapy or dietary advice, vetted and sort of borne out in the scientific literature about how we can actually resolve anxiety and depression permanently. So did you know that there is such a thing as nutritional psychiatry? If you did, put a comment in the links below. I would love to hear. You've heard of this, or maybe this is brand new to you. It was a surprise to me when I heard about this book, because I had been studying functional medicine, naturopathic medicine for quite some time. And, people in those spaces have been talking about amino acid therapy and nutrient therapy for all sorts of resolution of all sorts of different disease states. I was always interested in the mental health space particularly. But now we have a codified, title that's even being sort of like stamp of approval by Harvard, where it's like, yes, nutritional psychiatry is a legitimate field of study. So check that book out. If you're interested in buying that book, I put the link below. So just click that link and it'll take you right to it. A couple of scientific articles just to sort of put some meat behind this claim that we can actually end depression and anxiety forever, and the role of the microbiome in sort of creating these conditions in the first place. So the role of the gut microbiota in dietary interventions for depression and anxiety. There is emerging, I'm just going to read this highlighted part. There is emerging evidence that an unhealthy dietary pattern may increase the risk of developing depression or anxiety, whereas a healthy dietary pattern may decrease it. Scientists always have to use the word may, or it like might reveal this, or we might need more information. But really, there's been now 20, 30 years of functional medicine practice that it shows this really, in my opinion, in a categorical manner, that what we eat affects our mood, affects our sleep, affects our energy, and of course it affects things like depression and anxiety. Now, might it be the only cause of depression and anxiety? Well, no, because remember, we're dealing with the biological the social, the spiritual, and the psychological. All four of those domains can have powerful effects. So the food piece, or what we eat piece, really matters, but it's not the end of the story. Here is an example of, from that same article, here is a graphic that sort of describes it. So here's you, right, in the middle, and you have depression and anxiety. Now, if you think about the food choices that you're making, depending on if you're eating fast food or high sugar diets or high vegetable oil diets, those decisions that you make every single day will affect the gut microbiota. And we have, I know it's a little hard to see, we have a healthy diet pattern here, which would give us, vitamins and minerals, omega-3s, phytochemicals, which are a simple way to understand phytochemicals is fruits and vegetables have different colors. So yellow and orange and red and blue. Those yellows and oranges, reds and blues are actually indicators of different chemicals. So red things have certain phytochemicals, and certain bacteria and protozoa and microbiota will actually consume and need those phytochemicals or polyphenols, right? Eating anti-inflammatory foods. So this is the healthy type of diet, right? And that'll decrease, you see the little decrease sign here, your depression and anxiety. Now, if we come down to the Western diet, if we call it the standard American diet, the acronym for that pretty much tells the story. It's a sad diet. It actually makes you more sad. It makes your gut health worse, and it makes your brain health worse. So Western type diet, which is essentially inflammatory foods, which again is sort of like high carb, which breaks down into sugars, high sugar, high inflammatory, and including things, and you really want to watch out for high vegetable oil diets. We'll get into that in another video. But if you're doing that, that will increase, that will make a positive effect on your depression and anxiety. You don't want that. That's going to make your depression and anxiety worse, right? So if we come down here, why is that the case? Why is that making you feel worse or better? Well, because if you're eating a good diet, you're getting fiber, so that helps gut motility, like being able to digest food and move it through you. Omega-3s, macronutrient ratios are accurate or appropriate. Food additives, phytochemicals, prebiotics, all those things will affect the gut microbiome, right? Now, the more that you have depression and anxiety, the more your autonomic nervous system gets dysregulated. So you're experiencing high levels of stress, high levels of worry or fear. The more your neurotransmitters get dysregulated, and the more you have inflammation pathways throughout the brain, and that's affecting the gut microbiome. So your depression and anxiety feeds down to the gut microbiome, but also the food choices you make feeds into the gut microbiome. And then they, in turn, bring you metabolites, help control your vagus nerve, which is so critical. We can't cover it here, but it's so important. They'll give you lower inflammation or higher inflammation, and they may, depending on what you're eating, cause gut permeability, which is basically small holes in the gut lining, which allow food particles and bacteria to travel into the bloodstream and to be systemic in its inflammation. That's not good. That'll cause things like depression and anxiety, suicidal thoughts, brain fog, etc. And that is sometimes called gut dysbiosis or leaky gut syndrome, which is what some people call it. So this is a good little graphic that came out of that same article, and I want to end on something fun. So let's talk about fecal transplants. You heard me right. Taking someone else's poo, putting it in a pill, and swallowing it or suppositorying it into your body. I know it's gross, but, and I'm not saying that you have to do this. By no means am I saying that. I'm just using this as an example that's kind of like, it's weird, so it'll stick in your brain probably pretty well. But this is one of the ways that we actually learned about anxiety and depression being driven by, and then also sometimes cured or ended by, how we're dealing with our microbiome, right? So let's read this here. Fecal microbiota transplant, okay, just as it sounds, that can affect anxiety-like and depression-like behavior in mice, that's sort of affecting the inflammation gut-brain axis. So it's lowering or increasing inflammation, depending, right? So what did they do? An antibiotic cocktail was used to deplete the gut microbiota. Stop right there and just think about, how many times have you been given antibiotics in your life? How many times have people you know been given antibiotics? Have you ever once, after the antibiotic round, been talked to by a doctor to say like, hey, you need some probiotics, you need to eat a lot of vegetables, you need to maybe do some fasting, you need to build up your gut microbiota after an antibiotic round? Has that ever happened? Most people would say no, and it's just a travesty of the Western medical model. Now, antibiotics can save lives, but they should not be given willy-nilly. And maybe, 30 years ago we didn't know why, but now we know why. They wipe out categorically your microbiota. They don't take out just the bad guys. They don't take out just the good guys. They take out the whole ecosystem. And then your gut is left trying to rebuild that, and it can be quite devastating. And many people will have antibiotics and then experience depression or brain fog or anxiety after the antibiotic use. Side note, we get most exposure to antibiotic uses through non-organic foods, particularly the meat supply. That's where most of the antibiotic usage is in the entire world, is in industrial farming with animals. So if you're eating unorganic meat, then you're getting healthy doses of antibiotics, whether or not you're going to the doctor, whether or not you're getting it at a hospital. Okay, that was a side note. Now, what happened? Well, the mice showed higher levels of anxiety and depression-like behavior compared to the controls. So when you knock out the gut microbiota with antibiotics, you get higher levels of anxiety and depression. Fecal matter transplant affected both behavior and neuroinflammation. So when you put good, healthy microbiota stuff through the fecal transplant, then what you get is changes in behavior and changes in inflammation, particularly brain inflammation. And those changes are in the good direction. So you're lowering neuroinflammation and you're getting healthier behavior. So improved sleep, improved levels of risk analysis, improved levels of mood and motivation. Specifically, what we see, what this inflammation is, and we kind of know some of this, is interferon, and you don't have to know what these things are, and tumor necrosis factor alpha, TNFA, in the hippocampus. So you're seeing elevated levels of inflammatory markers, okay? Interferon gamma and tumor necrosis factor alpha are inflammation markers. Now, pause right there. Don't blame those things. Those are not the problem. They're a symptom that shows up as a result of there's some type of inflammation, and they're there to help quell the inflammation, and bring you back down to homeostasis. So the existence of those two things rising in the hippocampus is a sign that something else upstream is actually going wrong in the inflammation pathway. Okay, so don't blame the things that show up to say, hey, we're trying to help, and say that those are the problem, because they're not. Gut microbiota modulates pro-inflammatory cytokines. So those are called cytokines, those inflammation markers, and they're there, remember, to sort of like soak up the inflammation and then bring your body back to a balance. Those are cytokines, and they are occurring in the hippocampus, which is our memory location of the brain. Through dysfunctional microbiota, gut-brain axis exacerbate anxiety and depression like phenotypes. Now, a lot of science speak. All that really means is when those cytokines, those inflammatory markers are in your hippocampus particularly, they make anxiety and depression worse. That's exactly what that means. And at the end, they say the results suggest a link between gut microbiota, brain function, and anxiety and depression. Again, very tempered science language for we need more research into this. We can never say anything categorically here, of course, which is reasonable. But if you take a clinical practice of naturopathic functional medicine, integrative medicine doctors, for the past 30 years, plus a history of understanding of how all disease begins in the gut from Chinese, Ayurvedic, indigenous medicines, then you can basically categorically say what happens in your gut affects your brain. And if you have anxiety and depression, the very first place that I would work to end it, resolve it, like period, get rid of it, is I would make sure that my gut health, and on another note, my mitochondrial health was working healthily, was really functioning well. So, do you have to take a fecal matter pill? No, you don't. Good news on that. I don't even know if you can get those anywhere. And, I wouldn't advise going to the deep web and trying to find some fecal matter pills. Because who the hell knows what's in those, right? But what this does mean is we can end anxiety and depression forever and have sustainable mental health. It doesn't just wax and wane, seemingly for no reason, but that we actually begin to understand, when I begin to eat a high sugar standard American diet, that actually does begin to lower my quality of life. Or when I get these antibiotic treatments, that actually begins to lower my quality of life and increase my anxiety and depression. And that's something that we don't want, right? Thanks for watching the video so far. Here are my gifts to you. Go ahead and click the link below, put your email address in there, and then you'll get access to these two free ebooks, which are full of information all about the gut microbiome, how to take good care of it, and how to end anxiety forever. I mean, that's really what I'm focused on. I'm no longer interested in symptom management, though that must be part of the picture, but I'm interested in symptom resolution full on stop, right? The end of depression, the end of anxiety. That's what I'm after. And if you're interested in that, stick around, subscribe to the channel, all that sort of stuff, because that's really what we're going to be talking about throughout this whole YouTube channel. That was how the microbiome can drive anxiety and depression. Thanks so much. Talk to you later.